My name is Graham-Cumming and I am Chief Technology Officer of Cloudflare. Well, I think there's been an enormous change in terms of awareness. I think if you look back over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been so many high-profile break-ins, attacks that have affected individual consumers and companies. And pretty much everyone is aware that cybersecurity isn't sort of a science fiction fantasy, but is something they have to deal with on a daily basis. So that's everyone from, my mother to the boards of directors of large companies. So it's very widely now something that people are worried about. I think a big thing that's happened in Europe is you've seen certain things happen at the European level. So there's GDPR and there's the NIS directive. These are all great things that have been done. But this is not just a European problem, right? This is anything to do with the internet is transnational. So it's okay to do things in Europe and it's fantastic to be leading in Europe, but it's very important to recognize that the threats are global. Attacks are coming from all over the world, break-ins are by actors who are not necessarily in Europe. So this is a global problem that has to be dealt with on a global scale. The other thing is it's very important to include the private sector in what's being done here, because it's hard for governments to lead when a couple of things are happening. You have the transnational nature of things, and very often large companies actually see that before governments do because they're transnational. And the other thing is that the threats coming from all over the world mean that when you're trying to deal with this, you're going to need cooperation from companies that are operating all over the world. So it's hard to do it without looking at what's happening in the private sector. And equally, the private sector can move a lot faster than governments can. So working with the private sector is pretty vital. Well, if you think about it, cybersecurity is our lives, right? We are all using the internet all the time for our personal lives, our most personal things, and our business lives. So we're banking, we're looking on Google for information about some health problem that we might or might not have. These are all intensely private things. And so cybersecurity is something that touches everybody, and it touches businesses. Supply chains are all being run across the internet. So it has become interwoven in our lives. And so there's it's not a separate thing, cybersecurity. It's just as much as you might lock your front door when you leave, at the same time, you need to think about your cybersecurity, your personal cybersecurity. What can industry do? Well, I think the important thing is that there has been a tendency in the past for scare tactics and for an air of mystery around cybersecurity. Although these are complicated technical issues, they don't need to be complicated in solutions for people. So it's very important for industry to demystify and also not to use scare tactics. And I think if the industry can do those things, they will help make people understand. It's very, very negative if the industry says, this is scary, we're the only people who can understand it. My company, Cloudflare, did something a number of years ago, which was to give away SSL. So SSL is the way in which we have secure internet browsing. How you know your bank is giving you a secure connection. And it was very expensive previously. And we said, this is silly. We'll give it away to all of our customers for free. And those sorts of actions by companies are vital to help people realize that this stuff is not that complicated. Yeah, sure, there's some really complicated mathematics in the cryptography and all that kind of stuff, but you don't need to know the mathematics. You don't need to know how your front door key works to lock your front door. And I think we can do the same thing in industry. So I think when we think about policies, there are a couple of things that are important. Remember that this is a global problem, not a European or a national problem. So we have to look at this from a global perspective. Second of all, the way in which technology is developing is very much driven by industry. And so it's vital to be working with the private sector to understand how things are changing. And so really what you're looking at is a multi-stakeholder approach. You've got to look at, what is happening for consumers. So you think about things like GDPR, this very valuable piece of legislation for consumers. You have to think about what companies are going through as things are changing. Businesses are being built on the internet in real time, essentially, and things are changing in the environment in which they're operating. And you have to look at the longer term, things that governments might look at, which is to look at what are the overall policies that we think are right for our country, our sector, our area of the world, and then globally. I think an important thing to remember is that the internet was built on open standards. We have these requests for comments, which are actually the standards of the internet, are public and open. And it's important to do the same thing when we think about securing the internet, securing the cyber domain, which is to work with people in an open manner. That means not having silos. It can be very tricky if we try and have country-level laws that do something, because the internet is essentially global. It's very bad if vendors have lock-in, where you can only use their products, because that doesn't work well on the internet. You're really is an impedance match with the internet if you try to do these things in a locked-in manner. So it's very important to think globally again in an open manner, and that will get you the best approach from companies, and I think will work best for policymakers as well, because everything is, just like government, open in the way in which it's done.